if you're hanging around broke people, you're going to have broke conversations and broke thoughts. If you're hanging around very abundant and successful and wealthy people, you're hanging around 7-figure and 8-figure people, you're going to have those types of thoughts. And so it depends what you want. Do you want to scale to 10 figures? And you need to learn from $1 billion founders on how they operate at that level. If you're at 8 or 9 or wherever you're at, 7, doesn't matter.
Welcome, affiliated listeners, to another episode of me dropping something out of my hand, making a loud noise at the beginning of the episode, but an episode of the Affiliated Podcast where we are going to be talking about, I think, a thing that a lot of people want, right, is how do I transition to the next level? And oftentimes when we're thinking about this question and how to answer it, you might go to books, you might go to that, but we're going to have the answer today for you, which is you have to know people that have already done it. This is definitely a journey that is served best by those that have been there and reach down and help others come up. And so we're going to break down the mindset of what it takes to go from 8 figures to 9 figures, which could also be transitioned from 6 to 7, 7 to 8, whatever that might be. But we really want to hone in on that big jump, which is, hey, I've been successful, but now I need to go to a different stratosphere of success, of going from that 8 to 9, where you could go from an offer owner to a real business. Seems like a big transition. We're going to learn that today with our guest, who's an amazing expert and knows this better than probably anyone else out in the world, or at least anybody that we're going to be talking to on this podcast outside people who have made that journey, but could speak at a broad level. So with that, before we jump in and introduce our amazing guest, we want to bring in our delightful other co-host, Thomas McMahon. Thomas, how are you doing on the other side of the wall?
I'm lonely over here, Kyle. I miss you, but I'll survive.
I'll pound later just so you could feel like, there's something nearby.
Knock 3 times on the ceiling if you love me.
Yeah, there you go. So with that perfect transition, afterwards, let's bring in our guest. And as I mentioned before, so the guest we're going to talk about has actually been an entrepreneur, and he had a really great name for this. Location independent entrepreneur for over 15 years now, multiple businesses online, some offline, accelerators like business, ecosystems labs. One of the things that's really amazing that he's been doing for the last decade is as a podcaster and interviewing people that, 7-figure exits, 8-figure exits, 9-figure exits. And I think now you're in the $1 billion exit range. So we're going from millions, 10-figure, and you've already interviewed 30 of those billionaire exit individuals, and that number is counting, with the idea of understanding their journey, understanding the difference. That is the amazing, the incomparable Chris Reynolds joins us today. Chris, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, and I'm really curious, Kyle, why Thomas has a cooler background than you, but you're only on the other side of the other side of the wall. Thomas's background looks really good.
So yeah, I'm in the main podcast studio.
Yeah.
I'm in the real podcast studio. Kyle's in the closet where we call the remote podcast studio.
Yes, but, literally a X closet of all of our equipment. So
nice.
But yeah, it's a little bit easier than us staring at each other.
Can it like when I first started podcasting, I literally recorded the intro in my mom and dad's closet when I was back home visiting them because they had so many clothes packed in their
great
closet.
Sound quality. Yeah,
the best sounding quality. This was 2015, right? So little life hack: closets make a great podcast studio.
Yes. Yeah, I think it would be a great podcast too to say going into the closet, right? That would be a good title for whatever your podcast would be.
Or coming out of it too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one day we hope this podcast gets out of the closet, right? So anyway, that's I do love that. And yes, this closet seems to have great sounds, but we don't have clothes, just boxes and other things. So with that, man, though, great to talk to you today. And I think I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about kind of the podcasting journey and what you've done. But as I just want to recap to the audience why we need to listen today, you've been really understanding as a part of this process, not only your own entrepreneurial journey, but through podcasting, getting a really in-depth perspective at the mindsets and things it takes people to go from all these different levels of business ownership and exits. So super interesting. But before we get into kind of some of the findings you had from that, I'm curious about in your parents' basement when you're making that intro, like how did you come up with this idea and go about executing it on this podcast?
Well, it was before that. I was traveling the world. I'd been a location independent entrepreneur for a few years, and I was just having really amazing conversations. I was landing in cities like Barcelona and Lisbon and Rio de Janeiro, meeting entrepreneurs. And again, this is 2014, 2015 timeline. And these podcasts were just up and coming during that time. We're maybe on the second wave of the big podcast. And I was like, why aren't we having more conversations with the idea that somebody can open up their laptop and start to scale a business to 6 or 7 figures, or maybe even 8 figures on a regular basis, And so I started having those conversations. I mentioned recording my intro in my parents' closet. One time I recorded a podcast in the alley outside of a co-working space in Rio de Janeiro, and there's like church, bells in the background. That was with Bobby Edwards, the founder of Squatty Potty, right?
Oh, no.
And I was like, he literally just came off The View, the woman show and the female woman show in the U.S. And he literally just came off that, and he's now on my podcast. And I was like, if this guy knew I was in the alley in Brazil, I don't know if he'd be on the podcast with me. So yeah, it was putting those conversations online, giving a digital footprint to them and giving a voice to more entrepreneurs out there that were doing awesome things online while being in different places around the world.
That is super amazing. No, I really like that. Especially think a Squatty Potty in an alley. That's really, that almost feels like the perfect place to also interview that product.
I was going to say, there's
what a time you might need a Squatty
that.
Potty is when the potty isn't even there. So,
and actually, I was sitting on the Squatty Potty during the time. No, I'm just kidding.
That would have been even better, even better. So that's great, man. So just you kind of saw that need and that demand and filled it. And I imagine because you were early, it almost made it easier too to get some of the people on the podcast, because I would think that would have been the hardest challenge is how do you get these entrepreneurs to show up to this podcast thing when it was so new and their time is so valuable. So kind of question on that, how did you get, especially as you ascended now to this billionaire level, get these high-powered individuals to show up and spend time with you?
Yeah, I think being an early adopter kind of helped. Also, Bobby Edwards is a good example. That was one of the first 8-figure companies that I got on my show, and it wasn't even, I don't know, maybe a year or two into it, maybe 2 years. And two things. One, I think a lot of people underestimate how available people are in the world today. And if you have a decent platform, they're willing to come on and you can promote them, and people love talking about themselves, right? So like we have a list now of very high profile people that have come on the podcast. When you drop like names like Alex Hermosi, Squatty Potty, billion dollar founders, Jeff Hoffman, big wave surfers, Laird Hamilton, when people are like, oh, those individuals are coming on this show, I want to come on the show as well. It gives them a little FOMO. I emailed Mark Cuban once and told him the list of people, and Mark was like, no. But one of that's a good opportunity or it's an important point, because what I do is continually follow up with a lot of people. I've chased down people for 9 months, a year and a half to get them on the show, and finally they end up folding or breaking and saying, all right, fine, this guy's persistent, I'm going to come on the show, and it's reputable already, so there's no harm in going on.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. I love the determination, but then also, like hey, be bold, and you be shocked what people might say back. Don't be bold and dumb, I'd imagine. You probably have to have some guardrails on what you say and how you go about it, but I definitely can appreciate that. Now, question for you on persistence, then we'll jump into the main subject matter. Just really curious, because this is, I think, a point that we see a lot of people miss on. Persistence doesn't necessarily mean annoying. So walk me through kind of how you balance follow-up without, especially when it might be 9 months, without, ruining a relationship or just coming across as a pest.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know. It could be, I could have come off as a pest to many people, and they just either stop answering my emails or given in one way or the other. I think once they meet me and see that I'm a likable guy, then they're glad that they come on the podcast, But I would say any emails that I send out to, especially if I'm constantly following up with people, they're always short and respectful. It's like, here's the deal, 2 sentences is all you need. The worst thing podcasters can do, and they all do it, podcast outreach companies as well, is email somebody with this ginormous bio that's like 16 paragraphs about why this person. I'm like, I'm a busy guy. Like, people email me those all the time. I don't want a 2-pager email of why this person should come on the show. Make it quick and make it short. We're all busy, right? Make it respectful. It's like, are you interested in coming on a podcast? Boom, here we're interviewing $1 billion founders. Here's the other people that come. When I was doing like 8, 9-figure founders, are you interested in coming on the podcast? Here's some New York Times bestsellers. Here's some professional athletes, right? Make it quick so they can respond quickly, and they know they actually see that as more professional. I would say, anytime I got an email with a big long pitch of why this person should come on my show, I think that's actually not professional. Stop wasting my time. Give me 2 sentences that says, yes, exactly. Kyle wants to come on the show. One of the owners of ClickBank, $200 million, bump down. Okay, yeah, decision made. Let's go, sort of thing. Yeah. So that's what I aim for when I reach out to people, and it doesn't annoy people if you keep it short and sweet and respectful.
Yeah, I know, Thomas, you said preach on that. Want to expand a little bit more? Because I do love that. The sweet and simple part. Holy crap. If you could just tell me exactly why we should have this guest on, or the flip side, like, I just want to get to the point sooner. So yeah, Thomas, if you want to give your, I was going to say something clever about, but I missed it. So I'll just sand it off to you.
I think we all know when we're getting sold to, right? I don't think anyone loves to be sold to, but and that comes through pretty obviously in a cold email outreach attempt. But when it's, short to the point, and you can tell that they've done a bare minimum of, they just know where they're going to add value to you and you're going to add value to them. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. If you make it really hard to say no to and just makes sense, it's very easy to say yes to, and just make that path forward a lot easier.
That's how I know that I'm dealing with somebody that doesn't need me versus somebody that needs me, and I want to communicate that to the guests that are coming on the show as well. I don't need them. I would love to have them, and it's by respecting their time, 1 to 2 sentences done, it's on.
That's awesome. Well, as we derail on outreach, it just was such a good topic, and I was so curious, probably self-serving, right? But I think that was awesome. So let's go into the main subject that we want to talk about, which is this transition from 8 to 9 figures for entrepreneurs. We really want to highlight that. If we have time, we might do a little sprinkle on the whole 7 to 8 kind of transition and what you need to do to go there. But I find that sometimes that 7 to 8 is sometimes a little bit of luck, and just a normal 7-figure business doing well. But 8 to 10 is where you need that big switch. So what I'd love for you to do is just in general, talk a little bit about, a little bit more about the people that you've interviewed in that 8 to 9 realm. And then kind of talk about some of the trends that you noticed that existed. And we'll say first, the 9-figure people. What are some trends you noticed, the things that exist in those folks?
That's a really good question here. I think, first off, I wrote down some ideas before the podcast of interviews that I've done, and because I want to put the patterns together of what's worked for people to go to 8 and 9 figures. And one very important question is, will a niche support it? And if it's not, will the niche support it? Is the business positioned correctly in the niche, right? Because there's a lot of people that can go from 7 to 8 and get at 8 figures and be stuck there because the niche can't support it, that whatever business, product or service it is, or they're not adaptable enough to change the product and service so they can be in the right niche, right? If you have too many competitors that are out there, if you're so niche down that there's actually no market for it, then you're not going to make it there. That's not your fault. It doesn't mean you're not a great entrepreneur. It's just whatever product or service you're offering. Sometimes there's a right place and there's a right time. There's when Uber launched, when Facebook launched, when, all the unicorns out there, when they launch, right place, right time, and right team, right people, all of this, right? One of the next things is very important. Sorry, did you want to expand on that? Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, well, just because I think I really, really believe in it. It actually makes me think. I think Thomas had a thought too on this, but it made me think of a product that stood out I could see that too niche down. We had a product, this is many, many years ago, and this is going to explain all my gray hair. But it taught people how to build characters in World of Warcraft. So like way back when that was a big deal, this was a 7-figure offer on our platform that did very, very well. But obviously, good luck turning that into an 8 or 9-figure business, right? Like you're very niche down, you're too specific. It converted very, very well into the limited audience that wanted that product and had demand for it. But good luck, right? And eventually time runs up on something like that where it's never going to hit that scale. I was going to be curious if there may be some other examples that you had where you could see like, hey, here's an example of somebody I talked to that they had to completely change their business to go to 8 figures because they just weren't in the right market. And if that's not, that's fine. It was just kind of curious if you had a specific example.
Let me keep it in the back of my mind because I'm certain I've talked to somebody about that, but I don't know if I can think of.
That's fine.
Right off top of mind, I do know.
You wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was. Let me add.
This might be
real quick. Sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry.
Then we'll have Thomas go next. Yeah.
I was just curious in your general sense of where luck comes into play with all this, Chris. Like it sounds like there's some element of luck. You know, you start talking with some of these people, they had the right fit at the right time. You could argue that luck is when, skill meets opportunity. But through chatting with these people and these different levels of success, is there an element of luck at play, or do you think it's more down to the entrepreneur and what they're able to execute on?
All of it. I think all of it. Like there's so many dynamics that come together. It's very comparable to a sports team. You guys are in the States, so like Kansas City Chiefs, which is actually my hometown, so I can brag about them, right? Like putting Tom Brady and the New England Patriots, right? Putting the right leader there that has the vision for so many championships. Michael Jordan's another perfect example. Getting the right people on the team. Also the right time in the right place. So I was, Kyle asked about an example, Manta Sleep Mask, amazing 8-figure company, top sleep mask, one of the top sleep masks in the world. A friend of mine runs a company, Mark Zhang. If he launched a sleep mask company 7-8 years prior, it wouldn't have grasped the attention that it does now because of biohacking, because of the trends, because of what people want, right? And if he launched it, a few years after, it probably wouldn't have gained the market share because there had been a lot more competitors, right? But does he have to tweak it consistently and change the product a little bit and create new offerings and, even, going to creating to the point where they're creating courses to help people sleep, to sustain the level that they're at and continue to grow. Yeah, they have to, but he has to, somebody has to be adaptable. So did that answer your question, Thomas?
It does. Yeah. Because
okay.
Yeah, I agree. It's
okay.
an intangible.
I think I can expand on it more,
happens,
but we've got plenty to talk about here. So
yeah. No, I think that's a good way to say it. It's just like what Thomas is saying is that luck matters, right? But it's obviously not the end all be all because we use that sports analogy. You can put all the right pieces on paper and you're one torn ACL or Achilles injury away from all of that collapsing on itself, right? So if you look at any dynasty runs, Michael Jordan's health plays a big factor in it, right? Being able to have those players into the playoffs, being in the 90s when you didn't have a salary cap helps, right? Like all these things, creating those scenarios. But like I said, it's a recipe of a lot of different functions to get there. And I think it's always good to acknowledge that luck is one of them, but not the only one, right? That goes in there. I love that sleep mask example too, because it's timing paired with product fit, market fit. It's not, there's a lot that goes even into timing. So with that, you mentioned the separate second point. So one is that having the right product and niche, could even hit those numbers, right? That's your first thing. So then the next piece you went into, and if we have time, we might go back and kind of scratch the surface on some of these, but I want to make sure we get all of them out first. So talk to me a little bit more about that second point you want to make.
The next one is the leader or the founder or whoever's driving, the company. Are they building it for the money or are they building it to take it to the moon? Right. And I see this so often because a lot of entrepreneurs start a business for the money, and that's okay. Right. But if they start it for the money and they don't have the drive and the love and the passion for the business, they're going to come to a point where they really want to exit. They'll burn out. They want to exit. They want to move on, which makes sense. They want to do something else. And if they don't and you can tell the difference. Like, this is a great question for anybody that's interested in investing in a business that they want to see bring long-term returns. Is the leader thinking about an exit, or is he thinking about the next 10 years, the next 15 years for this business, right? Is he thinking about he or she thinking about the long-term vision? Do they want to build it to the moon? Or do they see themselves leaving after 3 years, 5 years, and then moving on? So that's something to think about. Because if there's a cap, and I have a dear friend, love the guy, has built multiple 7-figure businesses, but he can never break that mid 7-figure ceiling. And he's working on it now, and I think he might get it. But he comes to the mid 7-figure point, and he's just like, I can't do it anymore. Boom, I've got to go back to what I know, sell this company and start a new one, right? And so there's a lot of entrepreneurs that operate like that. So there's just a ceiling there, or internal programming or mindset that stops them from going to that next level.
Do you see any similarities on exactly what that blocker is? Because I imagine whether, I don't know if it's the task, if it's what it takes to go beyond like creation to sustain, or creation versus growth. Like, I'm curious what you maybe see as a common trend of that blocker for people that want to continually exit versus continually grow.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. One, confidence and insecurity. It could be also how they grew up and their beliefs around money. And then also, there's a thing that entrepreneurs and founders have, and people that operate at this level. Once they go beyond like 9 figures, there's really no limitations, right? If you can build $100 million company, I've seen people get stuck at that 8-figure, right? In 10 million, 20 million, 30 million. And they're just kind of like, I can't go. But once they go above 100 million and beyond, there's really no limitations in their brain. And they're not thinking, we're going to cap out here. We can do this. They're incredibly abundant, and they know all things are possible with the right idea, with the right execution, the right strategy, the right team. And that's it. Especially interviewing these $1 billion founders, they are just absolutely limitless. I interviewed a woman yesterday, Sanira Madani, I hope I pronounced her name correctly, founder of Stacks, a credit card subscription payment system, and now the founder of Worth AI. She started at 25 building this company. Within 10 years, built it to a $1 billion company. And now she's starting her second $1 billion company. She's 3 years in or so. And she'll do it a second time, because she knows the system. She's limitless now that she's built $1 billion company, right? And so I just see a lot of people, whatever their number is, it doesn't matter if it's 5 figures, it's $100,000, if it's $1 million, if it's $10 million. A lot of people just have a number inside of them that they think that's enough. And it stops them from going either beyond or having a drive to go beyond, versus individuals that have the vision. And individuals that just have the vision, there's no number there. It's just growing that vision, that product, that service, whatever it is. Another great example is Drayton McLean. Drayton McLean's out of Austin. He's the founder of the McLean Group. The McLean Group's a wholesale grocery distribution business. Built it up to a $19 billion company in the 90s, sold it to Walmart, became the vice chairman of Walmart, and then bought the Houston Astros. Wow. Then he came back in
to baseball team ownership, right?
Exactly. Right.
Just build a $19 billion distribution company and become a member of Walmart.
And funny enough, he had only been to 3 professional baseball games in his life, and he's like, no way. Feels like it. This will be a fun.
Sharing seems like a nice model, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And he's like, this will be a fun project. But anyway, now that company does $50 billion a year. It provides all the groceries for the Walmarts around the world, and he started out. He took over his small town his parents' grocery business when he was a kid. And he was like, I'm not going to do anything else but this. And my goal is 30% year after year after year after year after year. And that was all he did, and he spent 30 years running a company, building it. And that was in the 90s when he sold it, from the 60s to the 90s. And he just had the long-term vision. And some people don't have that. Again, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's individuals that have it, and there's people that don't. And sometimes they'll get stuck if they don't.
Man,
totally agree.
That is so much in there. Yeah, go Thomas. I need to ruminate in all that was said there because I think there's really cool stuff for sure.
I'm curious what roles you see these founders taking on through the different stages of their growth. If there's any trends you see there, like, is there are they operating in different ways at different levels of the company? Are they usually operating in one core competency and hiring around them? Like, how do you see that playing out as we get into these higher levels of business?
Yeah, it kind of brings up another point that I wanted to talk about is it can go back to how long do they see themselves in the business? How are they really committed to the vision and the growth of the business over the long term? Or did they start this thing for the money and after so many years they really need to get out because they don't have the capacity to do that, right? And and then it comes down to like really putting the time and effort into all of that. And there's a time when people expect, I think they expect to replace themselves. Quite often it's too early in the business. They get sales and operations going. They get some, good finance and the team is doing decent. And they're like, okay, now it's my time to replace myself. And can they replace it with the right person? So the role will differ, Thomas, really, depending on, so many different factors. But it really goes back to, did a person start this business to take it to the moon, or did they do it to make money? Right. And if they started it to take it to the moon and change the world, this is the Steve Jobs thing, put a dent in the universe, they'll do it as long as the market, and the product and service is correct. Um, and if they started it to make money, they'll exit and somebody else will take over and might take it to the next level who actually has the vision that can take it to the next level.
Yeah, I remember an interview with Jeff Bezos, and they're asking him like, "Oh, what are you working on this quarter?" And his response was pretty surprising, where it was like, "I don't know." He's like, "I'm looking with the board, 3 to 5 years out and further beyond, kind of thing, and making moves for that." It's like the VPs and directors, the ones really executing to the quarter right now and on the shorter time frame. So it's like he's, and obviously they have the infrastructure and the leadership model to be able to get themselves out of the day to day as they kind of scale up that piece. But as you get to that level of company or even bigger levels of company, that ability to look further out and actually execute to a vision, not just put out the next fire that popped up today or tomorrow, really kind of gives you that steadfastness, I guess, right? You can kind of weather those different storms. Yeah.
Well, I will say this too, regarding the roles that they play, and you guys may have seen this. A lot of the founders at that level they're spending the majority of their time building the team and continuing to build the team over and over and over. They're like the head coach, in a winning team. Okay, who's the right player? Where do we need this player? Is this the right person to take this project to the next level? Is this the right person to take the company to the next level? Is this the right leader that needs to be in here constantly? So many people I've talked to are continually spending the majority of their time building that team, being the head coach of that team.
I love that as a reference point, and I think of like really we use lots of the sports that we talked about here, but we'll stick along with Kansas City and the Chiefs and the football model. Head coaches in football are often described as CEOs because what they really do is they set a general direction for the team, and the rest of it is maintaining the culture and the staff to execute on whatever that big vision is that they have, right? So it's one of the reasons you see a lot of, well, let's take this top coordinator and just plug them into head coach. And they're like, well, how did they fail? Even what they did well failed. Like we could use a recent example of the last season. The Jets fired their head coach in the middle of the season, and they took their defensive coordinator to be the interim head coach. And what immediately happened to their defense? It got worse throughout the rest of the season. Statistically, it started to get worse and worse and worse because essentially they just took somebody out, plugged them into some role without ever backfilling that other need. It wasn't ready to be replaceable. But I think that's a great thing because the head coach in football, what they really do is not all the video watching. They might help out the individual that does that. They might set an overall big strategy, but just similar to what Thomas is, they probably don't know what's happening for the goals of the third quarter, right? In terms of that year, but they do definitely know what our goals are going to be accomplished for the entire year. And they're meeting with their coordinators, meeting with the team to then execute what adjustments they need to be made. But it is a lot of like bigger picture vision and team building. I think that's really, really a great correlation there as you grow in those big levels, which I'd imagine too, if you're that person that thinks I want to be a 9-figure founder, right? I want to reach that level. But what we just described as something that you hate doing and don't want to do, that might not be in your future unless you start changing your mindset and your skill set a little bit. So, and not that there's anything wrong with it. Not everyone needs to be a 9-figure entrepreneur. In fact, I would argue most of us can't be, in terms of maybe mindset or skill set. So it's pretty challenging to have that viewpoint. So, circling back though, because I really loved that transition of what the roles are. Going back before, so we covered about 3 things that are really critical. I'd say 2.5 that are really critical for a 9-figure founder. What are there any other ones that really stand out to you? And then we can kind of maybe delve a little bit deeper into that 8 to 9-figure transition. And what are some of the things that start breaking or people have to really overcome that we haven't already covered?
I think I'll check out my little list of notes here, but I think we've covered all of them for the ones that I wrote down.
Perfect. I just want to make sure we didn't miss anything, and then we could jump into the exciting part, which is now we go from 8 to 9, and what are the warts that happen during that process?
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. Have you noticed any warts that happened from 8
to 9? Let's talk about some warts. One time when I was a kid, I had a crazy one. Oh wait, no, never mind. But yeah, no, let's break into that. So you're an 8-figure entrepreneur. You're going to you want to go to 9 figures. So I think one box we checked is, do you have the long-term perspective? Or are you going to 9 figures because you think that's when you could exit? That might be the first question you need to ask yourself. That could be limiting you. But yeah, let's go to some of the common shifts that you have to see people make beyond what we've already covered to go from that 8 to 9-figure range.
Well, again, as long as the niche is supporting it, the market is supporting it, that's okay.
We'll assume that's true, right?
Yeah. But I think it's a time too, and it can be different levels when people have this conversation with themselves. Is this the thing that am I the person that can really take this to the next level? And again, like I know people that are mid 8-figure entrepreneurs, and it's kind of like a crisis of conscience. You've got this baby, you built it. You've grown it. You've made a lot of money. You've helped a lot of people during that process. You've provided jobs, and you want to think that you're the person that can take it to the next level. But it has to be a really raw and hard conversation for a lot of people to admit that they may not be that person, right? And that's when you have to step aside, whether you exit or just have a CEO come in and let them run things for the next stages. I think that blocks a lot of people, because I can imagine, being at that point where you're just like, okay, we're at $50 million and we're doing amazing, but we know now is the time to go to 100 or 150 or 200. But I can't get the team past that. I can't mentally get past that. I can't, whatever the reasoning, right? And then it's like, okay, who am I going to bring in that can really carry that vision onto the next level? And, it happens in all sorts of different ways. Investors come in, boards come in, whomever that can come in and take the company to the next level. But I think it's a mindset thing. It's really pending that the market and the team and everything's set up in the right place in the right time, that it can be very challenging for somebody.
So let me ask this. We kind of covered mindset and some limiting beliefs. When you're trying to have that hard conversation with yourself, what are some common things that you think people should look at that might tell them, 1, yes, I am ready to do this, or 2, I might not be?
Yeah.
I know that's hard because it's always different from person to person, but if there's some general things you think are big ones.
Well, it's I would think the person's capability and the energy and effort that they're willing to put in, the capacity that they have, mentally, emotionally, how is the rapport with their team now? How is their team building skills and the type of team that they built up to that point? And, really thoroughly analyzing those questions over and over and over and over, just to make sure, like, okay, did we set up the pillars correctly in business? Like, sales and marketing are great. Operations, are they great? Is our finance great? Executive leadership, am I the executive leader that can really take it to the next level? Am I able to inject the innovation and adaptability to keep things going to the next level? So I would assume those would be some of the most important questions to ask yourself. And again, going back to like having that raw conversation, like, am I the person that can really do this? Can I give this another 10 years? We go back, like I look at the $1 billion founders, like so many of them spent 30 to 40 years building their company.
Yeah.
And one, some of them didn't even hit $1 million till the first decade. Right. So what was more important for them was the vision, was building this thing, whether it was a luxury travel company, whether it was a wholesale grocery distribution business, whatever it was, insurance company. It was the vision and the love for what they were doing and having the ability to hold that vision. Because when you're at that level, like it's, you look at any billionaire, any $1 billion founder, any high level CEO, if they can't hold that vision continually and keep it going. Look at Steve Jobs. If he couldn't hold the Apple vision continually over and over and over, things would have fallen to pieces. And if you can't continue to hold that, then somebody else has to come in and take it over, right? Even when Steve got replaced for 10 years, and then they broke Apple and it turned to crap, and then Steve came back in and it became, much better. It's like they needed that right person. And you have to be, I think, at that level as well, 8 to 9 figures. You have to be so far beyond 3, 5, 10 years, 15 years beyond what the team is operating at, what the other people, the executives are operating at, to keep them on your toes. But that's not an easy job. So you just have to have that in order to keep things going.
Yeah, I like one thing you really said in there is, are operations good? Our sales and marketing team working good? Like, is our tech, relatively to what we have access to? Are these operations all running well? I think that's one of those big ones that, as we said before, the higher you get, the more you're building and managing teams and then driving the ship towards long-term vision, right? That's if we kind of instill down how you have to go from 8 to 9 to 10 figures, the consistent leader is able to continually do that at all those varying levels. But that pulse check of, where am I right now? So I have a mid 50 million, hopefully you have some level of operations, some level of sales and marketing, something you're doing relatively exceptionally well. Even if it might only be one thing, you should have one of those. But being able to do that, Mark, have I been able to build each of these areas of my business, the pillars of my business, with good teams for what we're doing right now? If the answer is no, I think it might be, then why, and can I do that? And if you can't do that, that might be one of those things where the answer is kind of given for you if you're not able to build out those pillars in your team. And it's not to say that they need to be perfect right then and there. Nothing's ever perfect, but it should be good. And if it's not good, you should have an answer to why with a plan to fix it. So I think that was one of the things that really drew out of that. But yeah, that's really, really telling, that whole long-term vision stuff, of keeping that with a mindset of like doing it all the time, and then having that 10 to 15 year vision, almost constantly in the outlook. You're a bit of a Nostradamus, it seems like, the higher up you go, which is really interesting. I think sounds exciting. I was like, that sounds way more exciting as a CEO to me than all the other stuff. But who doesn't want to be a Nostradamus sitting there trying to predict long-term visions? That sounds exciting. Thomas, any other thoughts and questions about what Chris said too? Because I know there's a lot there.
Chris, I was curious on your take on founders starting and running multiple businesses.
That's a great question. There's 100% individuals that are born to do this, and there's 100% individuals that are not. I would say most people are not, if they want to build a successful business, and continue to build it to certain levels, because they need that focus. So the majority of the $1 billion founders, even 9-figure founders, even 8-figure founders that I've interviewed, are all focused on one thing. They don't have side hustles. They don't have these little, maybe they get to a point they can throw money in investments or into other businesses, but they're going to focus on one thing for at least 10 years before they start to dive off into other things, right? And there's some natural people, and then maybe they get to the point where they have the money and capability to start to run multiple businesses. And there's a handful of individuals that, seem to be really good. But again, it's because their vision and leadership, they can hold the vision and the leadership for multiple companies at once. But the vast majority of them all started out, I would say at least in the first decade, sticking to one business until they kind of prove themselves to, or prove to themselves, or proved, to the world that they can actually do that. And then, so like going back to, these are easy examples I'm just going to throw out there. It's like you have people like Peter Diamandis who can run multiple companies, or people like Steve Jobs that just wants to focus on one and continue to make it as big as possible, right? Yeah, yes and no. But again, sometimes it's just ADD that keeps people from focusing on one business, because so many of us entrepreneurs are ADD. And then what I've seen works really well if you are ADD, which is fine, having multiple projects within that one business. So Richard Branson, right? He's got the Virgin brand, but how many businesses are under the Virgin brand, and how many is he actually running? Probably none of them, but he's getting a great executive for all of them, and offering, his insight and ideas on a lot of them, but he's holding that bigger vision for all the companies. So that's a really good example for the serial entrepreneurs out there. But they all started with one thing, and then, starting out, anybody that I've met, I've got a good friend, Liam Martin. Liam Martin's the founder of staff.com and timedoctor.com, built two companies. They got to 8 figures, and he said, I would not recommend anybody build more than one business at a time. But I did it, and it worked, and we were successful. But going back to my advice, I would recommend everybody sticks with one business at a time.
Yeah, I'd largely agree. Just based on my clientele and who we see over here, it's like the ones that dabble on a lot of things usually get stretched pretty thin, and it takes a lot for one to get off the ground. And I'm curious, similar line of questioning, kind of around business partnerships.
Actually, before you go into partnerships, I want to do one thing on that, just to build off the last comment you said. I know you do some training with MMA as well, so I think you'll resonate with this. A lot of what we're talking about really makes me think of that sport in particular, because so much of it, where some of it's changing, but it's really reliant on, you have to use a multitude of different disciplines and skills, but you normally have one that was your main discipline that you learned how to figure out. You started at a young age, you mastered that one skill set, and you realize to go to this mecca, you're going to now take that one mastery and kind of fit it into the rest of the things that you do as you build up these skill sets to create the ultimate CEO that could defeat everything else, right? It has this kind of multifaceted thing. And so as you're talking about multiple businesses, ADD, I think a lot of people oftentimes gravitate towards MMA or something like that because you got to try a bunch of stuff all at once. But that's not necessarily going to make you good. You're much better at being like, this is the thing that I want to be focused on and get really, really good at it, to allow myself to bring more things in through that vein, if we use the Virgin example. So I just really, really like that. I think a lot of people find themselves bouncing as if the success will find them versus committing and finding success first, and then using that experience to kind of expand from there. But that was really, really interesting. That's just what popped in my head. So anyway, back to you, Thomas.
Real quick, if you don't mind. I love this question. It's asking yourself, like, what are you married to? Right? What do you, and once you become married to something, you're committed to something, all the other things just fade away. Right? You no longer have to make decisions about, should I do this? Should I do this? Right? I'm married to this one other person. There's no other people. I'm married to this one job, this one business, this one, whatever it may be. Then that focus, there's power in that focus, and it becomes very, very powerful. And then you become a master at something because you're so good at it. Then the world will come to you for whatever skill that you've gained. And you have to do that if you're going to grow those companies to 9 figures or so. You have to be willing to do that and able. You have to have the capability naturally to do that. Yeah.
Perfect. So back to your question you're going to ask, Thomas. I just that stood in my head, and I was like, I'm going to get it out. So, your question. Then then after this, I want to transition to kind of how you start developing some of this experience and how you gain this wisdom from those individuals. But we'll transition after Thomas's question to that.
Yeah, it can be a short answer, Chris, or however you want to take it. I was just curious, after chatting with so many entrepreneurs and founders, like what your opinion is when it comes to like kind of business partnerships versus doing it yourself, and kind of that approach and what you've seen.
Yeah, well, especially at the higher level, you need partnerships, right? You need some sort of partnerships. Like it's all relationship based team building. You need other executives there. You need other A players. You need other champions on your team to, be at the 8-figure, 9-figure level. You can scale and grow a business on your own, 6 figures, 7 figures, no problem. But once you start getting into the mid to high 7 figures, I wouldn't say no problem, it's a challenge, but once you start getting to mid to high 7 figures and 8 figures, like, you need a team. It's just such a behemoth of a company. And now we can circle back to Squatty Potty. They were doing, at the time, this is 2016, 27 million a year with 17 employees. I believe it was 17 employees, roughly around those numbers, which is pretty amazing in today's world. So Bobby can still hold the fort as the main leader with 17 employees at 20 million. But most people aren't going to have just 17 employees at 20 million, right? They're probably going to need a little more depending on whatever type of business they have. But I think without a doubt, as you get bigger and bigger, you're going to need some form of partnership. Now, it's an open-ended question also, Thomas, because it's like, like circling back to Steve Jobs, he doesn't have a 50-50 part, or he didn't have a 50-50 partner in Apple. So, and then it always depends, not always, but it depends on the dynamic of the individuals that are partnered up, the timing, their personalities, I've seen this as well. People get to, a certain level and one partner doesn't want to go to the next level and the other one does. One partnership doesn't want to go to 8 figures or 9 figures, one party in the partnership, and the other one's just so driven to. And there's a lot of tension and frustration there. So going back to luck and synchronicity and the right time and the right place and the right partnership and the right product and all of the above fall in alignment, and then you have your magic secret sauce. And maybe it's worth mentioning too that we all admire the success stories of seeing the people that are doing this, but the vast majority of us entrepreneurs are probably, if we're hitting levels of success, but we're much sloppier, and we're not like the movies, and we're not like the stories you hear on Inc. and Entrepreneur Magazine. We had a big fallout with a business partner. We had, some lawsuits that came up. We had whatever happened. We had a mental breakdown. We had, crisis in our personal lives that stopped us from, and then we started over and we continued to build. So the most important thing in the whole process of entrepreneurship is just continuing to be an entrepreneur because of the love of being an entrepreneur, right? And there's a science about going from 8 figures to 9 figures and 9 to 10. And a lot of things need to fall in alignment, and maybe we'll make that, and maybe we won't, and that's okay. But at the same time, the most important thing is the continuation of, the love of the entrepreneurship, and not to always compare ourselves to people that are doing 9 and 10 figures, but learning from them and just applying it as best as we can in our own businesses.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I kind of just summarized is the idea that partnerships are a yes, but just like everything else, timing, personality, and a lot of factors will dictate. Because even the perfect partnership to now does not necessarily mean the perfect partnership to get you to 9 figures, right? That might go from 7 to 8, but it has to always kind of check in. And that's where it sounds like to me, you need to be as an entrepreneur if you want that. We go back to that long-term vision, that ultimate leadership, right? You need to know when to have the hard conversation and evaluate your business to say, if we want this, we can't do it with XYZ partner. They don't want that. And that's not good or bad. That just is. So if you want long-term goal, how do you fix and solve that problem and find the right partner and right person and next step, whatever that might be? I think that's what I'm hearing from a lot of this, because at the end of the day, we know entrepreneurs have to love solving problems, because your life is just a barrel of problems, right? Like it's just kind of going down Niagara Falls, falling with more problems falling into it as you scoop the ones out. And like, if you don't love that madness, it's like, obviously at the end of the day, you can't have that long-term perspective. You can't drive to solve the next problem if you don't love that process. It's just going to get challenging at some point in time, because that's the only inevitability of entrepreneurships. Our challenges will come continually forever. So awesome. Well, let's transition kind of the next piece of this is, and I think you said this really beautifully too, is like, you have to love entrepreneurship, because where you could learn from 8, 9, 7, anyone that's above you. You could learn from all those entrepreneurs, but you can't necessarily replicate them or copy them or compare, because there's so many differences between you and them that technically might not be within your control, right? So that you could be the same person that just happened to stumble into a different life, and next thing you know, you're a billionaire versus somebody that isn't. I don't think that's always necessarily true, but it can be true for some people in some situations. We've all seen it. So that being said, I think community becomes a big element to that. And I've seen people talk about time and time again that the room that they were in made more of a difference than anything else in their business, because we talk about entrepreneurship. They met a bunch of people that were entrepreneurs where they felt that kindred connection. But these people had been to a different level, so they knew more and could share more, and that other individual could learn a lot more. But that all comes through senses of community. So walk me through kind of as you built communities, you've been a part of communities, you have a community right now. What is the importance of that transition in any entrepreneur's journey in transitioning from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 figures, whatever that might be, and what community holds a place in that?
Yeah, this is I don't know, not a cliche, but so commonly, such a common story that's told is you're going to become like the 5 to 10 people that you spend most of your time around, and it rings so true when it comes to levels of entrepreneurship and the way people operate and think. You may operate on, a 9-figure level or 10-figure level, but may not have that income yet, but you can operate with that mentality and spend time around and learn from individuals. So I found that so true over the years. It's like, if I'm when I was at a 6-figure level, and this is exactly why I did my podcast and series of interviewing, 107-figure entrepreneurs. I wanted to figure out and make friends with and spend time with 7-figure online entrepreneurs specifically, because I wanted exactly what they had. And then went to 7 figures, went up to 8 figures, and so on and so forth. And so, if you're hanging around broke people, you're going to have broke conversations and broke thoughts. If you're hanging around very abundant and successful and wealthy people, you're hanging around 7-figure and 8-figure people, you're going to have those types of thoughts. And so it depends what you want. Do you want to scale to 10 figures? And you need to learn from $1 billion founders on how they operate at that level. If you're at 8 or 9 or wherever you're at, 7, doesn't matter. And it's one of the things, like you mentioned communities. We have a community of 7 and 8-figure founders that are in our group. And one of the things we do every year is we take them to meet a billionaire. So the billionaires and $1 billion founders that I interview, I keep their relationship with them, and then set it up to where we can go meet that individual and spend a day or two and learn from that individual, so we can figure out how that $1 billion founder or that billionaire built a business, built the pillars in the business, looks at sales and marketing, looks at operations, looks at finance, looks at team building, looks at executive leadership and replacing themselves, looks at strategy and innovation and how they think about it to help you scale, looks at the market and your product and service and your niche and all the little details, so you can understand that from their perspective. Again, will you make it to $1 billion? I don't think that's the important question, because you may or may not, depending on so many different factors. But what's important is learning how to operate on those higher levels, so you can use those skills to, maybe it's build another business to 8 figures or 9 figures or 10 figures, whatever, to use those skills and apply them to your business to continue to grow.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's like, have the $1 billion mindset regardless of where you are, but you need to know and have the community to create that mindset. So I think that's beautifully said. And I feel like it's something, Thomas, we echo far too often as we talk about getting people out to events, to different rooms, networking, connecting, and all that stuff.
I think, because I think so much of it, people get focused on like, oh, what ROI I'm going to get from an event. But I'm very pleasantly surprised at how quickly oftentimes, I'm curious what your room's like, Chris, but how quickly oftentimes like the founders, the C-levels, whatever it is, are going really deep with their conversations with each other. It's might be about business at the start, but it quickly goes to marriage or fitness or health or all these other things that are affecting their life and their business.
And I actually think that's a horrible question to ask yourself before going into the room. It's important to consider what room you go into. But any room that I go into, I decide beforehand, I'm going to find the ROI that's in the room, right? And so we've had people come to events, and I've seen people go to events, and they say, "Oh, that it really wasn't worth my time, or there wasn't an ROI there." And I changed that mentality a long time ago for myself, and it's probably one of the key factors that I can connect with a lot of people. Kyle and I were talking. I went to Dubai for the first time, and within 8 days, I was at the top of the Burj Khalifa in a secret uh, investment meeting, right? And so it's because everywhere I go, whatever room I go to, I look for the ROI to be returned. Whether it's if it's a conference, and you don't feel like the people at at the same level as you, then talk to the speakers and the conference organizers, or talk to one person that you can actually really resonate with. That's where the value comes, because so many people go into rooms and they have this. This sounds kind of funny. They have this "do me" kind of mindset. I'm here. I paid you. Now do me. I don't care how much I'm paying to go to an event, and I've paid a lot of money to go to different events around the world. I'm always there, and I'm going to figure out who's the best person, who's the one person or two people or three or maybe 10 people that I can connect with to find that ROI. Is it important that, like, okay, if I'm scaling from 8 figures to 9 figures to be in an 8 figure room? Yes. But at the same time, you're not going to go to a room full of newbies on a regular basis. But even if you found yourself in a room full of newbies, I would ask myself, there's got to be at least one person here that's doing something impressive. And maybe it's the organizer. Maybe the organizer knows somebody that knows somebody. And that's networking skills, right? So you vet it by community and referrals. Always, like, if somebody says, "Hey, go to Kyle's event," or "Hey, go to Chris's event," that's probably a good referral, because that individual, at least what they're doing on a personal level. But I think it's much more powerful to come in with a mindset is like, I'm going to find the ROI in this room, no matter what room I am, and I'm going to continually make that a habit. And you'll just see so much more benefits that way, I think.
Man, I want to echo that so much, because I tell you, I've been into being in the BDM world, you take some real leaps on some events, and I've been to some events where I'm like, holy crap, this is not what I was expecting. But I always get that mindset of like, it doesn't matter, I'm here, so ROI is going to happen regardless. And I could tell you, I've never not gotten it, but I would tell you, I'd almost change the word. We talk about ROAS. We should talk about ROME, which is return on mindset investment, right? Because sometimes the ROI isn't necessarily ROI in the sense that, oh, I'm going to directly bring back a book of business. But there's been some that I learned really valuable information, about an entire industry I didn't know, learning new things that just, you're like, wow, this exists. And prior to this, I didn't know that, which influenced a bunch of other things that I did afterwards. Right. So there's tons of ROI in that isn't directly correlated, but made all of that time very, very worthwhile. So even if it's a friendship that gets you a random connection in Atlanta that you get to have one time, that's great too. So, there's all sorts of benefits. So with that being said, is obviously, these events are very, very powerful, and the community is so powerful. Why don't you talk a little bit about the community that you've been building? Because I think it's something that's really, really impressive, especially for people that don't live in the United States. And I think that's really, really key, because there's a lot of people domestically that we have the luxury of many things, one of which is a lot of masterminds and groups and communities of entrepreneurs, but that doesn't necessarily carry the same way over to Europe. So I'd love for you to talk a little about what you're building, and sharing with this great conversation about how you're doing this at scale with multiple people.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Our community is called M3 Founders Community. And one of the things that, just as you mentioned, in the United States, there's higher level entrepreneur groups all over the country. And there's probably one popping up every single day, actually, as we speak. And some of them will last, some of them won't, some of them will be amazing, some won't. But one thing I noticed, I spent a lot of time in Europe, and specifically Barcelona. And one thing I noticed in Europe, they're few and far between, relatively unheard of. And so I thought to myself, there's, especially with digital entrepreneurship and many people, being expats or digital nomads and living abroad now, and more people coming to Barcelona and Europe. I thought, we need more of a presence here in Europe, and we need more of what we have in the States. here for business communities that people can go to. And so I've been back in Barcelona off and on, but for the most of the time for the past 3 years, and have done continual dinners for 7 and 8 figure founders here in the city. Other founders in Europe, they like to come in every once in a while and come to the dinners. We do regular events, 2 live events per year. One of them I mentioned, we go and meet and hang out with a billionaire and learn from them. We have one coming up in a few months, actually. And then regular problem solving calls, regular, we have a Slack channel, regular communication on the Slack channel. And the main idea is so you can surround yourself with those higher level entrepreneurs and continue to grow, right? You've got a 7-figure business, you've got an 8-figure business. You want to learn from a billionaire. You want to learn from people that have been there and done that and scaled and that are in all these different niches. Like, you may be in an e-com business, but you are interested in SaaS, or you may be in SaaS and you're interested in DeFi crypto or, that world. And it's great to have a community of people that are thinking and operating like that on a regular basis, because it becomes more than becomes lifelong friendships, right? Because all of a sudden you're talking about your kids or your health or traveling together, or, maybe we go on one trip together and then these individuals as on the side decide to go up and meet one another, or maybe we play volleyball on the beach on Saturdays. And so that's the true community in today's world, like digital communities that are popping up, especially for entrepreneurs, where we can find our like-minded individuals and not feel isolated, and continue to grow and learn and scale.
Beautiful. No, I love it. So, and like I was saying, Thomas and I always talk about community and its importance and value, and a good mastermind. I'd argue some of the greatest learnings I've ever had in this industry or in life have all happened around masterminds. It's a little bit smaller groups. You get a lot more openness and vulnerability. And funny enough, lots of them aren't business related. There's a lot of stuff that totally was outside business. Not to say that doesn't matter. Business doesn't matter, but I think there's just some really impactful things that you get from here. So really, really amazing opportunity. So Thomas, you were going to say something that you had something to add as well.
Oh, I'd just be doubling down on what you both said. So
okay,
yeah, cool. +1, +2.
I think it's worth saying. Sorry, I think it's worth saying too. Like, a lot of people have a hesitation around joining masterminds, and I would agree with you 1,000%, Kyle. Like, some of the biggest business shifts and growth that I've had is because of people that I've met in masterminds, and being open, to it and going and learning from other people. So yeah.
Well, if we go back to that thing we were talking about at the beginning, right, which I think if we could materialize the difference and the guiding light of, I'd say, entrepreneurship, and the successful entrepreneur is those that have a mindset and a vision that stays in their head for a long period of time. If you are those people and you're around other people in that same vein, that's where you get those cross collaboration ideas, and now feeling not alone and connected. And then even if we use the metaphor of MMA, right? So I've been a kickboxer my whole life. I'm going to take all these tactics of kickboxing and now I have to go learn jujitsu. Well, it's going to feel really, really weird at first. You might feel like you're talking e-com to DeFi crypto people, but what'll happen is there's going to be skill sets and athleticism. They'll start to cross over and make sense and allow you to learn a lot faster and learn a unique style. And same on the flip side, those jujitsu people, right, if they're teaching you, they're going to see things from a different perspective because of those different worlds you come from. So the mastermind is the dojo of true coalescing, or people coalescing together and creating something that's dynamic and better for everybody as all these different disciplines come in. So in a way, it's kind of like your ultimate MMA gym when you have a mastermind with something that's as broad as this, because you get all those different things in there. So that's how I bring this back to fighting, right? So
yes,
Thomas's favorite thing. With that though, guys, so with that, for people that are definitely Europe, I would say if you're European based, this is going to make a lot more sense for you. If you're in America and you just want to spend more time with Chris, sounds great, but we want to focus more on the European folks. We don't want to say anybody. So for those that are out there, obviously 7 to 8 figure entrepreneurs, what's the best way for them to get started if they want to join and learn more about this community, or even learn more from you and follow your podcast? So what's kind of the ways that people get in touch?
Yeah, the easiest way is our website, m3.club. I know that's hard to remember, but M as in Michael, the number 3.club. And you can check out all the fun things we've done. We've done, I don't know, probably close to 10 different live events and trips around the world in the past few years. It's an incredible community, incredible group of people. And then for the podcast, the name of the podcast is called the Business Method Podcast. And you can find us on all the platforms that are out there. And we have two different types of episodes on the podcast. We have the interviews that we're doing with billion-dollar founders. And then we have short 2 to 10 minute episodes that are actually clips from those interviews. So if you don't want to listen to the whole interview, you can listen to the little clips to get the highlights from the interviews.
Beautiful. Love it, man. Awesome. Well, Thomas, anything before we let Chris go? This has been one of our longer podcasts, which I am so excited about. We talked about such just very deep, awesome things that get me really excited. But yeah, anything else to add or any other questions for Chris before we let him go?
I'm just appreciate you getting on the pod, Chris, and let me get to know more about you and your community. And so I have another great place and person to recommend people. So thanks for all your time here.
There you go.
Yeah,
and hopefully a dinner to have in Barcelona anytime you happen to be there.
Yes.
Thomas.
So yes.
Both of you guys got to come. Yes.
I want all the paella and all the.
Yeah. it's the pork, man. Those pork things. Like I thought about if it wasn't against customs, it's like, how do I get this home? Yeah, the ham. Oh yes, that ham. The spiraled ham legs everywhere. My little heart's just filling with sodium as I look at them. So beautiful, guys. Well, Chris, thank you so much again. It was really, really wonderful. Appreciated this conversation. Thomas, what do you tell the people on our way out?
We tell them, and Chris, happy scaling.
Happy scaling. Beautiful.
Happy
Until next
scaling.
time, be safe. Thanks so much, everyone.